Yes.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I heard that.
Okay, we're gonna wait 1 more minute before we start. I know people are trickling in right now.
Yeah.
Computers.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm gonna be there, so. We might be back. Yeah. Very well. I can pass it down, that helps. Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up. If you're a professor, you call us students, and may want to sit on the front to show more support. Okay, we're gonna start. Welcome all to all of you for being here. This is the DePaul 124 AAPI Heritage Month event. Sorry about this. I'm Professor Li Jing, Director of Global Asian Studies Program, and we organize this event, AAPI Heritage Month event, every May. And the purpose of this event to bring the entire DePaul community, as well as our friends, outside DePaul, together to discuss some of the issues that's very important for our Asian American communities. So this year, we're very honored to bring a panel of film industry professionals. So just probably not film, just media professionals. Here, share this topic about Asian American media. The title here has Asian American media come of age, race and representation in the globalized 21st century. So first, actually, I want to mention that this thing each year with our theme is a little bit different. So we welcome everyone to come back every May if you're interested, whether you're DePaul students or you're just our community friends from outside DePaul. Okay. So the first, actually, I want to introduce our, I don't see this one, Mr. Jose Perales, to here giving the welcoming remarks. Mr. Jose Perales is DePaul's interim vice president for institutional diversity and equity, and has been director of operations at DePaul's Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity since 2009. And his broad professional career features more than 35 years of work in diversity spaces. And I want to mention that Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity is one of our co-sponsors for tonight's event. They've been one of our partners for many, many events. We're supporting almost all our events in the past decade. Right, okay.
Appreciate the invitation. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of President Rob Manuel, we'd like to invite everyone to this event. And welcome you warmly. You're going to receive, they're going to receive their introductions, their proper introductions, but I do want to thank our panelists, Tim Yu, Jason Matsumoto, Brian T, as well as our moderator, Dr. Ryan Yokota. So let's acknowledge all of them, please. Thank you. Putting together these events takes a lot of work, so I do want to also acknowledge the sponsors, Global Asian Studies Program and the Critical Ethnic Studies Program. We're proud to support the work that you do. I want to give a special note of thank you to Dr. Li Jin, who is heading the program. She also is the director of the Global Asian Studies. She has served on the AAPI task force for several years, and we're really proud to say that because of her work and her talent, we are now certified as an AAPI institution. So that makes us eligible for federal funds and grants that we can apply for. So I wanted to thank her for all of your work and also for the commitment that you have for our students, our faculty, and our staff. I look forward to working with you for many years.
I want to clarify that the NSCP, some of you probably are not familiar with this term, which means our DePaul right now, you're eligible to apply for lots of hopefully federal grants, which can be used to support our Asian American faculty and students. supporting our student activities on campus, also support our faculty research as well. So probably means that we're going to have more this kind of events in the future. Okay. Next, I want to give a little bit background introduction about our moderator, Dr. Ryan Yokota. I want to mention I sort of like hijacked this event this year because this event is combined with Dr. Yokota's class this quarter, and some of you are coming from critical ethnic studies. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. So I want to mention, okay, let me give you a little bit background information about Dr. Yokota. Dr. Ryan Masaki Yokota is a teaching professor in the history department who also works as an adjunct faculty professor in the honors program and the critical ethnic studies program at DePaul. He regularly teaches on East Asian history and Asian American history subjects, as well as popular culture and media studies topics. His research focuses on transnational ethnic studies, and he has published a number of works on Okinawan post-war history and Japanese Okinawan history in the US and in Latin America. I want to mention, stress that Dr. Yokota is our key person. You know, every year when we have any events focused on Asian American studies. Thank you so much for to be part of to be a partner with me this year to organize the event. And now give the floor to Dr. Yokota for you to introduce the panelists and also run the rest of the event. Okay.
We don't have a microphone, so we'll be projecting. Please let us know if you can't hear us for any reason. We'll try to raise up the volume. I just wanted to thank Dr. Li Jin in terms of proposing this topic this year, and of course for heralding and being the front person for this Global Asian Studies program. Your work through the years has been so vitally important for this university. I just wanted to thank you for that formally in front of everybody. I think that this program, I just wanted to give you a sense of the run of show. We'll open with introductions to our panelists, and we'll give each of them about 7 minutes to talk about whatever they want to talk about in terms of the work that they're doing currently. After that, we'll open it up to moderator questions, in which I'll ask you all a number of different questions. And hopefully that conversation will be very free-flowing and relaxed, hopefully, for all of you. Beyond that, the last 45 minutes, hopefully, we'll open up questions to the audience. So please, as you're listening to the conversations, any questions that come up to you, we'd love to hear your questions, and we want to really have a good interaction here in terms of the panelists, as well as you as the audience members as well. Okay. So I wanted to begin by introducing each of the panelists. On your far right is Tim Yeoh. Tim Yeoh, for the past 20 plus years, has been the festival director for the Asian American Showcase, a festival that screens films by and or about the Asian American experience. This festival is presented by the Foundation for Asian American Independent Media and is hosted at the Gene Siskel Film Center downtown. It actually begins this weekend from May 23rd to May 27th. We certainly have flyers here, and I'm sure Tim will give us a little bit of a rundown as far as some highlights from that program as well. Next, on your far left, I'd like to introduce Jason Matsumoto. He is the co-founder and co-executive director of Full Spectrum Features. He has produced or executive produced over 20 films, including titles that are premiered at Sundance and Tribeca. Jason led the development of award-winning digital content, cinematic history projects that have been awarded or presented at the American Historical Association, the National Council on Public History, and the Association for Asian American Studies. So thank you as well, Jason, for being here. Finally, certainly not last, but certainly not least, Brian T., hopefully a face that you'll recognize from many different kinds of productions. Brian T. is an actor, a producer, and director, known for his roles across blockbuster action films and groundbreaking television. Brian recently starred alongside Nicole Kidman in Prime Video's Expats, which received critical acclaim. Previously, Brian starred as Dr. Ethan Choi in NBC's hit drama, Chicago Med, for 8 seasons. Really wonderful wonderful show if you haven't seen it already. So thank you, Brian, for being here as well. At this point, we'll open it up to each of you in turn. Maybe we'll just go in that same order, Tim, and then Jason, and then Brian. 7 minutes or so each in terms of what's on your mind, in terms of the work that you're currently doing.
There's very few, I mean, there's a beautiful group of people here and would love to have this like fireside chat kind of conversation aside from us kind of like lecturing in some kind of hall. And I think what would be wonderful if you guys can actually like come a little bit
Yeah, get a little
closer.
closer. Feel engaged.
Feel engaged, right? This is gonna be as informal and or formal as you want, but we're a pretty informal group up here. I mean, me and Jason know each other, we just met, but
Me and Ryan know each other. I showed his film before he started teaching here. You showed your documentary like 15 years ago?
please, please.
Brian's gonna show it tonight.
Please, thank you.
So I'm
Get comfortable.
just gonna start it off by saying, I'm Tim. My superhero power is I'm an auto mechanic by day and I run a film festival by night. So we don't get paid for running the Asian American Showcase. It's our 27th year. We're just a bunch of, actually not even a bunch, it's like 4 people. That just, we love what we do. We've been given the opportunity through our partnership with the Gene Siskel Film Center to be able to program Asian American films. I mean, that's like crazy. I mean, we were literally the first film festival in America to only screen films by or about Asian Americans. All the other ones in New York, LA, San Francisco, they show international Asian films. So we were the first ones to actually put it out there and say, we're an Asian American film festival. I think our experiences growing up in the Midwest is different. We don't have the strength in the numbers like the coastal states have of like just being surrounded by, more Asian Americans. And I think because of that, we're kind of looked at differently also by non-Asians. Growing up, it was definitely one of those things for me where I never really saw myself like on TV, in the movies, and I watch a lot of TVs and movies. And I would, see someone that looks like me, but I'm like, he has like an accent, or like, oh, he's like way foreign than I am. And it was because of the Asian American Showcase that I was able to finally connect and relate to what I was seeing. I'm like, that person is literally just like me. It was something really cool, something very empowering, and something that literally had changed my life. I was just an audience member. It was this thing that a couple of my friends had started. They were in rock bands. They were Asian Americans in rock bands, and they put out the first compilation CD of Asian American indie rock bands back in 1995. It's called Year of the Dragon. At the time when MTV played videos, they got like news coverage by MTV. They did a national tour where they just took a bunch of bands, toured the country. It was something really cool. And when they got back, they decided that, they wanted to promote Asian Americans in film, literature, and art. So they created the Foundation for Asian American Independent Media, created this partnership with the Gene Siskel Film Center. And ever since we've been doing this, we used to do visual art shows, rock concerts, lit programs, but mainly like lately post-COVID, we've just been doing the film festival. But it's really important for us to be able to show films that not only that we connect to, but we feel strongly about, and knowing that there's a lot of people who just don't have the opportunity or the access to see movies like these. Which is, it's a shame, but it's something that like everyone has streaming services, but you don't go to like, Asian American content, Asian American cinema. I go, what's in there? So everything's kind of lumped together and it's kind of hard to find things. So I think that our showcase is important. The documentaries that we show, it's empowering for us to be able to present our history. It's like one thing, like when you go to Sundance and they go, we have this Asian American documentary, but for us to be presented to our audience, it's us dictating what our history and what we want our people to know. So we have some great documentaries. We have some really good feature films this year. One of them stars one of your expat stars, Smoking Tigers.
Oh.
Yeah. I have programs. We start Friday, May 17th. Our opening night film is called Dee Dee. It was at Sundance this year, so it's kind of a big deal. Our closing night film is Smoking Tigers. His expat star is in it. She's a star. She was trying to come to town, but I think she might be nominated for awards, so she couldn't come. We have some really cool documentaries. We also have a program with Cartanquin Films this year. They were able to, basically they were in charge of a seed fund for money that some people from Chicago had donated like a bunch of money to give to filmmakers for AAPI voices. So they decided to start giving this money to filmmakers. And so what we're doing with Cartanquin on Saturday is the filmmakers that were chosen, we're going to go through their project. We're going to show clips of their films. We're going to go through the process of like, how do you make a film? How do you make a documentary? How do you, get feedback and what's the end result? And then on Sunday, we actually have one of the finished films that they had seeded. So it's a feature film called Nobuko Miyamoto, A Song in Movement. It's about Asian American activist, folk singer, someone who's been around since like the 60s and 70s. She was involved in the Yellow Power Black Panther movement. And she's actually going to be at our festival, so you can meet her in person if you're interested. I have tickets to give away to people if they want to go to our festival. So talk to me later. I have program booklets, buttons, and stickers. So, but yeah, so that's kind of like what I'm about and what we do. So I'll move it on.
I have nothing to give to you all. Put that out like right immediately.
Come on.
It's right.
Come on, they're
here.
films.
And also, I know Nobuko Miyamoto. She is a badass. She's been doing the thing
Yeah.
like for many, many, many years, and she rarely comes to Chicago. So I would highly recommend. You're gonna be in town, you said, right?
Yeah, she's gonna be in town. She's gonna be at the Cartanquin thing on Saturday, and then we're showing her film on Sunday, so she'll be there. Yeah. Yeah, she's just cool. Like,
She's a badass.
yeah, it's just everything about her from when she was young, when she was a teenager, she was like a Broadway singer and dancer.
She was in West Side Story.
Yeah, and she realized that she was just being hired because she was exotic, and she realized early on in her life that she was just being marginalized, and she didn't like that, and that's when she decided to like, I'm gonna quit this stuff and like try to find something that I feel good about doing. So yeah, you should definitely come and check it out. She's definitely one of those people who's been around with her Grains of Sand. She was a folk singer in the 60s, 70s. Yeah, come see her. And again, I might have tickets to give away.
I'd also like to give a short plug for that film. She gave me a job back in the 90s, so I'm quite grateful to her for that. But yeah, her Asian American folk group was a pioneer in terms of Asian American music. And as I mentioned, she was one of the dancers in West Side Story, the movie, where she was cast against race as a Puerto Rican.
She was so cool that she used to hang out with John Lennon. Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I'm Jason Matsumoto. I'm co-founder, co-executive director of Full Spectrum Features. Full Spectrum, the company is kind of a full service development, production, distribution, impact distribution company based here in Chicago. It's about 9 years old now. Yeah, 9 years, yeah. And we started as like almost almost no resources, two people, an idea about what it would be, like what we could do to create an organization that we always say like that when people who've pitched and have had like 7 no's in a row, they come to us and we say yes, you know, so it's like finding the ways in which we can uplift and support storytellers' voices who we don't typically see on screen. And then thinking about not just like what that takes to get somebody on screen, but like the entire ecosystem of how we can start to fill out different roles. Everything from executive producer, you know, like folks who are standing behind the camera, the actors in front of the camera. What does that look like when we kind of commit to that process? And we think about what systematically has to change for more people who don't see the film industry or production or whatever as a possibility for a career to find their place in that ecosystem. So we've, over these 9 years, we've made like more mistakes than we've had successes. But I think that we've grown our organization from like nobody getting paid to people, like I call it a startup nonprofit, which is like just the worst thing you can put together. Don't do it. To like a 16-person full-time organization here in Chicago, employ 16 people on any given year. We're doing productions that employ another, 300 to 500 folks in production. We have development pipeline that's hoping to develop projects, develop scripts, develop ideas. We have a production team that makes films. We have a program team that thinks about how to exhibit those films and how those films can have impact in the world. And we have an education and research department. And it's not about educating around filmmaking, it's about how we're using some of the work that we create, how we're pairing that with scholarship, academia, community members, curriculum developers, teachers, educators, students, to use what we're creating as a teaching tool in the classroom. So kind of all that, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, and we've kind of hit this point where we're like stabilizing our operations, and at the same time, like we're like have seen this very rapid growth, just from, I think like this industry is really interesting where like as you make more connections, you do bigger films that get noticed. There's just a lot of like inertia that comes both from like that activity outward, but also like people seeing that and then coming back towards us. So we're both like trying to balance this growth. We're like now the single largest like film nonprofit in Chicago, and we're trying to balance that growth with I think like thoughtful and careful. Like we're shepherding people's stories forward, right? And so like that is not, it's not a machine that we want to turn on and just crank out. I think what we're trying to do is have a different relationship with those storytellers and with the communities whose stories we're telling. And that, I think in and of itself creates like a longer timeline and also some like deeper thought around like how we're engaging with all these artists that we're working. So that's like in a nutshell what Full Spectrum is doing and has done. And I think that kind of answers the prompt.
Sounds good, sounds good. Brian?
I don't have a Full Spectrum or a film festival company.
But you have a talent.
Yeah, I guess we're supposed to introduce ourselves and kind of help with our origin story. Brian T, half Japanese, half Korean, born in Okinawa, moved to LA when I was 2. Grew up in a very suburban area that was my utopia, maybe 20 miles east of Los Angeles, called Hacienda Heights. And at that time in Hacienda Heights, it was like 30% Hispanic, it was like 30% Caucasian, 20% African American, 20% Asian, and it was amazing, lovely. Went to college at Berkeley, wanted to be an actor. I won't go into why my parents didn't want me to be an actor, because I'm sure some of you have already felt that. But came back home to Los Angeles, and most of my family lived in Koreatown, LA proper, and that's where I started my journey as far as an artist is concerned. And didn't know how Asian I was until I actually got into the industry. And the industry said, you're able to like play in this box, right? This is your sandbox, and everything outside of that. You can only hit the edges, but outside of that, you know, you're gonna gun for, and this was back in the early 2000s, so you're gonna gun for
Lawyer.
or no, not that good.
Right clear.
Japanese businessman number 2,
Ninja.
North Korean soldier, that kind of deal. And all of us from, you know, I guess my generation is me and Kenny and Sung and Leo and John and DK even. We're all gunning for scraps, you know, and I think going through the journey, it's been an eye-opening hard hill to climb, and I'm being completely honest and open with all of you guys as far as we're focused on Asian Americans in media. And I know that the pendulum is swinging maybe a little bit, and maybe it's kind of due to the tragedies that have happened since COVID. But it's been an interesting kind of, I would say, up and down effect for a very, very, very long time. Up until you can get to a point where you may be able to almost supersede your Asianness, right? You're able to get roles and play certain characters that aren't necessarily Asian, because you've kind of outpaced your identity. And so I was able to get on Chicago Med for quite a while, which was just a character, not necessarily Asian, that they kind of put me in, and was able to do 8 seasons there. But what I find very interesting about that, though the exposure was great, right? It's wonderful to say, hey, there's another Asian on television. And we get 7 million viewers per week on a night basis. And what I find very interesting coming off that show is that in the 8 seasons, we never really talked about my character's identity. We never really talked about where he came from. We knew he was Asian because it was obvious, but we never really talked about it. And though I circulated it a lot, it was something that was never touched. And even shooting through kind of the COVID Asian hate peak, we mentioned it one time in one episode in one line, and that was it. And as much as like I went back to the studios and to the heads and the communities and all of that other stuff kind of banging the door, like we need to say something, we need to be a part of something. Not to say that there was an effort in-house, but it was never fully gone through the fruition in which I hoped to really, I guess, educate, right? Because I think the medium is powerful. It moves mountains, changes political systems, whether fake or real. But that's how powerful it is. And in order for us to really make change, we have to tell our stories, really do, so that we can like put our hands across the aisle and say, this is us, let us educate you, right? Let us identify with who we are. And then allow others to say, oh, that's very interesting, or maybe relate in some kind of universal way. So they're not looking at us as some kind of foreigners, they're looking at us as people, as Americans, that we all, and that was the hope, because on that show, I knew I wouldn't be able to do that. I know it would only be a visual thing and not an internal thing. It wouldn't be a story-driven element. And those are the stories that now I'm looking towards and wanting to be a part of. Expats is a perfect example of that. Expats is done by Lulu Wang, Nicole Kidman. It's got Amazon Studios behind it, and it's a very Asian American look from a book in a wonderfully poetic drama that's extremely cinematic, but yet we're telling our story through our POV. And of course, there's other elements to that, but when people watch it, you get a sense of relationship, you get a sense of understanding, and it's that understanding that bridges everything. And the medium is so powerful that if we create that understanding, then I feel like we can really enhance and expose everyone to each other. That's my 7 minutes.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all of you. I think I'd like to just go into some of these questions a little bit. I'm going to go sort of in turn from your left to right. And Jason, I just want to start with you because it kind of touches on what Brian was talking about in terms of telling these different kinds of stories. You've helped to produce a number of films specifically about Japanese American incarceration as well as resettlement. And then also Full Spectrum Features has produced numerous works highlighting minority and LGBTQ stories. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of being a producer? What are the struggles? What are the issues related to funding? How do you guys overcome those kinds of issues in FS?
Yeah, so I think like maybe one helpful framing here is that like the kind of the system that like Brian is working in, which is like Amazon Studios and like big network television, like the area and the ecosystem within where Full Spectrum works is like very independent media. So I think that for us, there's an easier time to bring like this very true, authentic story, but the support and the kind of distribution that we have access to is much smaller. So like, I think we're coming at it from a different angle with the same goal, understanding that cinematic storytelling, movies, films, they really do like create this humanization within the characters that can translate across anybody who's watching these things. And it moves people. It moves people to action. It moves people to think about themselves or the world differently. And so we've had a lot of luck and success because we're a nonprofit as well. So we're a nonprofit media arts organization. So we've had a lot of luck connecting the issues that these filmmakers and storytellers want to talk about to the funders who care about those issues. So that's like one way that we've maybe in a non-traditional sense have not started like a for-profit production company. We started a nonprofit because we understood that the work and the impact we wanted to have was going to be around issues and like social issues, issues of social justice, like issue-based policy movement, things like this. And that's mostly like, at least in this country, most of that's funded by like the foundation nonprofit, you know, like university space. So that's been our trick, which has been to figure out like this, like the artist, boss of the production company, and then who are the funders and how do we build relationships with those funders to come in as part of this, what we call the capital stack that goes into making these very expensive things, which films. And even in the independent space, it's more expensive than you would imagine it is. So that's a place where we've had a lot of luck, which is connecting the issues to the money that cares about those issues and making those two things come together. I think interestingly enough, we've been doing a lot more work like with co-productions across Europe and across Asia. And I think what's really interesting is that like this nonprofit model of kind of combining different types of money into a film project is less the model here in the US, but like if you go anywhere else in the world, there's a lot of public funding that goes into film. And it has to do with this idea that film is very powerful, understand that they kind of bet on their creators and their makers in other countries with like public dollars. So we've found a lot of success too working on these international co-productions because they understand this model of effectively connecting money that is tied to social issues into the kind of stories that will move those social issues forward. So that's I think a way that we've tried to approach. It is so hard to get like if you walk into like a pitch room and you try to get traditional Hollywood style funding for like one of our films is about it's like a lesbian love story between a Mexican American and a Pakistani Muslim who love lucha libre. They're from Chicago. You go pitch that and people are like, what? Like But we can find the funders in different places because people want to see that. Other people want to see that story told, and other people understand the power of that. And so I think for us as producers, it's about matching that interest, people's desire for impact and the art.
What Jason is doing is full spectrum is phenomenal. And to have it here at home is, I think, for all of us, incredibly amazing. I mean, I've tried to pitch these series, tried to pitch these shows that have things about, Asian American issues. I guess we're kind of talking about one that I'm pitching out. It's an anthology series, but the first season is about Ivan Taguri. I don't know if you know Ivan Taguri, but it's the Tokyo Rose story. She was basically tried for this crime she's never committed. It was the O.J. Simpson of the late 1940s, early 1950s.
Except she was innocent.
Except she was innocent.
She's Chicago.
And she's Chicago.
They own the store to
Yes,
Murray. Yeah, I
yeah.
used to bowl with their grandson.
Yeah, it's an incredible story of America's story.
Yeah.
But from everywhere we've gotten hard sell. We've even gone as high as like NBC Universal. Been in the most warmest pitch room because I've worked with NBC for quite a while. I even had the head of D&I in there, and it was still a pass, unfortunately, because stories like ours or stories about issues are harder to tell, and that's why I commend Jason and Full Spectrum for what he does, because it's a hard road.
You should try and pitch it as a horror story.
Yeah,
I'm literally not joking, because they'll fund it, but if you look at the AMC series, The Terror,
sure.
they did a whole season Japanese internment camp, but it was based as a horror story. But by doing so, they were able to tell real stories that happened in the camps. Crazy stuff where like people who weren't Japanese went with them because they were their friends and they felt what interning them was wrong. But they were able to tell these true stories through this AMC horror series. And that's like why I'm saying, like, try to find an angle, but to see things like that being pitched, if you find a twist to it,
I think genre is helpful. I
Yeah.
also think in creating stories, as far as the larger media is concerned, you need to find an angle and hide the spinach.
Yeah.
What we like to say. You need to tell your stories in an eventful way and kind of feed them the broccoli secretly, right? And I think in that sense, you're able to speak of certain issues and identify, yet being a part of either a genre or a scope that is palpable for a larger mass of kids. And, instead of really taking issues head on, I think if you can do it creatively, you stand a better chance in selling or making whatever it is you want to do.
Just sort of building off of that comment, Jason, in terms of your productions, you have numerous productions that have an educational component. In Full Spectrum Features, you have this education department. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like doing works that are actually have a certain design element related to educational use in classrooms and your experiences with that? Because it's a very innovative approach that we don't really hear about too much.
Yeah, I think early on we sat down and we saw this problem happening over and over with like young, not just young, just filmmakers. And like, you like in the independent space, you like convince a bunch of your friends, probably your family, to give you like a bunch of money. Hopefully somebody in your family can like just fund your project. And then you go make it and it's really hard and like you ask all your friends to like do this free labor for you. And then you like make this thing and there's no plan or strategy for like how that thing is gonna have, how you might want it to have an impact in the world, but like most filmmakers are not thinking like, okay, I'm thinking about my impact strategy right now. And I'm like, as I'm writing the script, like it's gonna do this, this, and this. And nobody's thinking about that. So like you finish this thing that you put all this time and effort into, you put all your family's money into, and like it like premieres and then it like sits on like your computer for like the next 20 years and like nobody ever sees it. So we sat down really early and we're like, what is our theory of change? Like why are we doing this thing? And because these like early short films were about Japanese American incarceration, which is like this, like it's talked about in school curriculums, but like not very deeply. And there's not a lot of complexity to the way those stories are told when at least when I was learning, about this history when I was in like junior high and high school. So we told ourselves like, okay, let's make a short film. Then let's get like this whole advisory board of academics and curriculum developers and teachers on board to deliver a tool that we could package together with the film. The film would act as like this kind of empathic, cinematic, humanistic connection to a character. And then they would be dropped into this like digital education tool where they could actually learn about the history. And so that's what we did, and we built that. And the challenge is honestly, we're bringing these two worlds together, like education and like film, and like these filmmakers like sitting in the same conversation together, having like a chat about like what the film should be or like how the script should be written. The total mistake. So we're like just bringing these two worlds together is massively challenging. And then so actually right now, like Brian's coming on board to his third installment, and what we're super excited about is, through Brian and his network, we can hopefully get like a different level of like talent into these projects where like, as opposed to us trying to push this stuff out into the education space, maybe Brian acts in it, maybe he directs it, and like maybe one of his friends did, and like that pulls people like these students into this through the interest in like star power and talent. And what does that do when we combine this model with, people at like Brian's caliber of fame? But I think that's like
something.
Yeah, but that's really like, I think like we've been developing this model. We believe in, again, like the impact. We're focusing it in on where people are really forming their opinions, which is like in the K through 12 space, right? And we're trying to think like, how best can we situate this so that the most people can go through this experience when they're like forming their opinions about other people, about history, and how can we create like experience that is both like fun and like kind of like lettuce is hit the broccoli.
Yeah.
Broccoli's in there.
Spinach.
Spinach or the broccoli is in there, but it's fun, it's interesting, it's experiential.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of a new model that we're developing.
I think it's really wonderful, and it goes to point out sort of like innovative and creative ways that you are all dealing with this question of distribution.
Yeah.
And getting it in front of eyes and viewership. And I want to bring Tim into this conversation a little bit in terms of that. Tim, having had decades now working in this festival.
Wow, you're making me feel old.
Space. Well, I'll age myself and say that, when I was an aspiring Asian American documentary filmmaker and my piece was made,
And we showed it.
I was so thankful to have that opportunity to show it here. The festival circuit was really the place for Asian Americans to get their films out there, to get it in front of eyes, to have viewership. We talked about a couple of things at the beginning before the forum started today. Can you talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen in terms of festival spaces
Yeah, sure. You're all pretty young, so that means that you don't go out to film festivals. You sit at home and you watch things, you stream things, and you like things through social media.
Is that true? Whereas like,
Am I right? No, like in the old days when we didn't have like the internet and we didn't have social media, if you were actually into something, you actually had to go out and physically experience it. Seeing a film, especially like in a film festival with like people, like-minded people, it creates conversation. A lot of times you get dialogue, you get Q&As after them. And it's that shared experience with someone when, as opposed to like sitting at home, streaming something, watching it off YouTube. It's completely different. I'll even take it further, and we'll talk about Justin Lin's Better Luck Tomorrow. So he did this film. I don't know if anyone knows about this film.
I hosted them at University of Illinois when
Okay,
I'm dating
but
myself.
I don't think you know, you know the whole story about it. I partied with Justin a lot, so we know the stories. So, what happened was, Justin Lin created this film called Better Luck Tomorrow. And it was about Asian American high school kids. They got into trouble that, you know, typically Asian American kids don't. And it went to Sundance. They screened it. The audience went crazy. All of a sudden, during the Q&A, some guy gets up and goes, "What right do you have to show Asian American kids in this light?" You know, and Justin Lin was about to like go off on the guy, and Roger Ebert stood up and said that he can show them any way he wants because this is their story. This is from him. It's like saying Robert De Niro, you can't show Italians as gangsters. That's wrong. And it was like a big deal. So the film got bought by MTV. That was like the first film that MTV Films ever bought. They bought it, and then all of a sudden, like, they sat on it because they didn't know how to distribute the film. They're like, "Oh, wait a minute, is this foreign? These kids are all like Asian." They didn't say Asian Americans. You know, there's like no subtitles. They speak English, but they didn't know how to like actually promote the film. So they literally sat on the film for like a year, and then finally they said, "Okay, here's your release date." And they're like going, "We're not going to give you any money to promote the film. So we're going to give you one weekend. You guys go out, see what you can do. And if you can sell tickets, then we're going to put money behind it." So they actually went out, groundwork, every organization, everyone was just buying screenings. They sold tickets, then MTV put money behind it. The thing was, once MTV bought the movie, they kind of made Justin change the ending of the film. And there's only been like, I'm gonna say, a couple thousand people that ever seen the original ending of the film. And what it is, it's super subtle, where the end of the movie, they're starting to drive away. And in the original ending of the film, they're just like driving off into the sunset, like going, "Yeah, we got away with it." And that's it. And in the audience with a bunch of like, when you're watching it with other Asian Americans, you're like, pardon my French, but you're like, you felt empowered. You're like, "Oh, this is so cool." And then with the MTV ending, there's hesitation in them. It's subtle, but they hesitate and they think about what they did with maybe regret, as opposed to the original ending where they didn't. And it totally changes the way you feel about it. I mean, again, because I was lucky enough to see the original ending, but it sort of like kind of like took a little air out of the ending, or if you never saw the original one. But it's also like being in that room with like all these people seeing it, and everyone's like, and then like going to the regular screening and like going, what just happened? But that's partly part of the film festival experience, is that you can experience these things like, again, the original Better Luck Tomorrow ending, which Sundance, San Francisco, LA, and Chicago is the only ones that were able to show that film in that entirety. And that was because we supported Justin when he was a student filmmaker. He was like a nobody. He would just do these like little films. He worked for the Japanese American National Museum, you know, Tat runs it now. And he would just do these little docs, and we would show him. And then he'd come to town and he's like going, "Take me to White Castle." I'm like, "Sure, whatever." But so then you develop a friendship with these guys. And then when, you know, they make a big film, hopefully they remember you and go, "Oh, you were one of the film festivals that bought me White Castle. You let me sleep on your couch. I'm gonna let you see my film." And like, you know, again, we're presentation. So he's talent, he's production. So all their hard work in the end hopefully comes to us. It doesn't always happen that way, where like some films, people just think they're too good for us, you know, and the problem is that by screening it in a very specific festival, like say an Asian American festival, we're going to build the word of mouth. We're going to get people talking about before the release of the film, before anything happens. And that's what's going to generate buzz for the film. If they decide to go theatrical. Most people nowadays are just like selling straight to streaming, so they're not even planning to do theatrical for stuff. So in a lot of ways, we used to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna get it because we're the end product, but now it's like, oh, I don't think we're gonna get that film. I'm like, well, I don't think, they don't want it, they have a bigger plan for it. In particular, A24 is kind of like that, where they're great. They're producing really great films. They're really great films, supporting really great directors, but they never play film festivals, and it kind of sucks. Yeah, I mean, Lulu's The Farewell, Lee Isaac Chung, Minari, yeah, they bypassed all the Asian American film festivals and just said, whatever. And you're like, but we want to be part of it. This is what we've been fighting for 27 years now, is to be able to be part of that journey, to present it to our people, get them excited to tell their friends. And then when the film really wants to come out, we're like, we did all the work, now enjoy it. So in a lot of ways, we've been like feeling kind of cheated since we've been doing this for so long, but but there's smaller films that still need support. And the problem is that nowadays, everything is like brand name recognition. Like if you look at a movie and you go, oh, I don't know who the actor is, or I don't know who the director is, like, I'm not gonna take a chance on it, And that's kind of the sad thing is that we don't have that kind of power yet, where you're like, well, oh, I've kind of heard of that actress, or like, oh, that director, like, oh, she won a Tribeca $1 million screenwriting award. Oh yeah, we don't have that kind of like knowledge yet, that database for people to start to build into and go, oh yeah, we do, because we're like, oh yeah, we showed his short film like 5 years ago. Oh yeah, we know that person. Like she submits stuff every year and we reject it. And you're like, but this is the 1 year. It's the good stuff. So I would, if you get a chance, come to our festival, just pick a film, and just dive into it, see what his work does, see what his production company does, and come to our festival and see what, the end product of everyone's hard work is. And it's again, it's about building community. It's slightly political, just being like a very small niche festival. It's one of those things that you never thought like it was political, but it is. You're taking a statement about who you are and what you stand for. Yeah, and like the Gene Siskel Film Center, they will never let us show like a foreign film, because they go, that's not what you're about. These are your stories. You show these movies. This is you. So yeah, but definitely, we don't see a lot of young people come to our festival anymore. It's all like in the old days, like back in the 90s, it was like cool to be at a film festival. We did a lot of like really cool punk rock stuff back then. And then as we got older too, our audience seemed to get older too. But it's because they appreciate what we do, because they never saw these stories. They never learned the history. And to be able to relate to it on a big screen, they get a lot out of it. But I definitely think young people will too. So,
Tim, I wanted to thank you for bringing up Better Luck Tomorrow and Justin Lin. Especially, really want to tie it into this question about the Fast and the Furious. How many folks here have seen Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift? We have here the original Drift King from that movie. And I don't know about you, but I am trying to start a campaign to bring the Drift King back to the Fast and the Furious franchise. If they can take Jason Statham and take him from a villain and bring him into the hero camp of the family. I feel like they should be able to do the same thing with DK.
DK.
But Brian, kind of like to second to that question, what was it like being in that film in a more earlier stage of your acting career, and I guess moving now into a more contemporary time? How has your acting changed? How has your feeling related to being sort of behind the camera or in front of the camera? How has that changed? And then I think eventually I'd like to hear a little bit more about your transition now in behind the camera as a director. So any thoughts on any of those things?
Yeah, the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift came out 2006.
Yeah.
So we're almost running on 20 years now.
Wow.
And back then, as I talked about, we were all gunning for scraps and very little to small roles. And it was, as far as community, it was hard to come together because there was so many limitations on what you would be able to portray on screen, and so many of us wanting to be a part of this ecosystem. And I say that because I think now, hopefully, and I'll ask you guys, if you guys feel a sense of community, if you guys feel a larger sense of identity, whether it's in school, amongst your peers, or in the media. Because when I was coming up, it felt like the Highlander effect. And I don't know if you guys know the Highlander, it's the rule is like there can only be one. So they would like take out everybody else so they can beat them.
They also have to cut out.
That's also true. But in that context, with the Fast and the Furious, it felt like, oh my gosh, this is the one movie out of the many movies that we can all be here as a part of the community, be in the same movie. That's crazy to me. And then it'd be backed by, $100 million and a giant studio and a part of a massive franchise that really didn't have any of the leads in it. We're like, doing it. And this was Justin's third film. And we were all kind of, one, scratching our heads like, did we just hit the lottery? But two, we were all very motivated, wanting to make something special, wanting to make our story, really trying to explore what we actually can do with this opportunity. And that's what we set out to do. And I feel like over the course of, almost the 2 decades, they come out with every one, and I don't know, they're at 11, I think now. And I feel like Tokyo Drift seems to always come back in a very cult way that keeps us in the zeitgeist. And I think that's always a good thing. How I've transitioned out of that is I think I want to try to identify with stories that are much more in the Asian American world. And I felt like the character that I portrayed was a foreigner, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just didn't identify myself, if I were to see it visually, as that guy. I saw Sung's character and he played the character Han, and I was like, oh, that's very interesting, and that's cool. And I kind of lean towards much more of my personal identity as far as the roles that I'm seeking after right now. But I think also there is a cultural element to stories that people identify with that are completely universal. And in that aspect, you can still tell your stories, whether they're American, Asian American, or Asian, right? As far as like being born and not from here, and still have thematic identity as far as it being very universal to read through multiple cultures. So I wouldn't ever worry or hesitate in telling your story. I think that's what's really important. I think you need to be smart and team with people to see where you can distribute, to see how you can further, to see where you can tell a particular story, and maybe mix in whatever it is that you want to say in almost a backdoor, maybe a genre of hide the Spanish kind of way. But those are the stories that I've been interested in. Those are the stories that I feel like I've been doing this for so long. I want to be a part of something that actually means something, than something that just entertains. And I'm not saying that being a part of something that just entertains is bad. Not like I just jumped onto a Reacher franchise. And I play a villain. And I say that now because I don't want to, expose myself later and be like, he just wants to be a part of, things with meaning, but he's on Reacher. And I was like, no, that's not it.
Reacher has meaning.
I think in being a part of larger franchises, as far as exposure is concerned, that's always a good thing. But I think when you can put two together, I think you've hit kind of a sweet spot that I'm really, really looking for. I think Expats is one of those things that is on Amazon right now that you'll look at, but it's not necessarily the most commercial thing. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of something that is as commercial, yet still in that world of meaning. And those are the stories that I want to produce. Those are the stories I want to write. Those are the stories I want to be a part of. So to answer your question, hopefully, from Tokyo Drift to now, I think that's the journey that I've come into.
And now also, if my understanding is correct, last week they showed your episode, your second directorial episode from Chicago Med. Would you tell us a little bit about what it's like now being behind that camera?
I'll tell you that I think anyone, and I don't know if anyone wants to get into the industry, or they're just really looking as far as finding their identity in the media and what that means here. But I was fortunate enough to be a part of this industry. I loved what I do. But I knew that I had to get in a different position in order to tell my stories. As an actor, you're given stories and you're like, you do what they give you. And that's it. And hopefully it has these elements that we just talked about. But as a writer, as a producer, as a director, you get to put your hands in it and you get to really push those things that you want to actually push. So with Chicago Med, I knew that I had an opportunity, being a part of this massive franchise and being an actor on it, to use all of the club facilities, right? I wasn't just gonna like sit back and get paid. Like I knew I was a big part of franchise, a giant studio, a giant network, and I'll have all of this exposure, but I would have access. So I just leaned into the access. So I started shadowing any director that would come in, especially my executive producer directors. I even shadowed producers back on the NBC lot. I even went into the post-production and shadowed the post-production house, writer's room, anything and everything that I could. And when that opportunity came, I just asked for it. And I said, listen, I've done all of this work. I want to direct an episode. And they looked at it and they said, yeah, sure. You can do this. And so in that aspect, I got behind the camera to really want to, and of course, the show is structured the way that it's supposed to be structured. But if I can bring in certain nuances, certain identities, cast differently, right, and tell the story in a fashion in which I hope will move a particular pendulum or needle in a different direction, then I feel like I'm doing something, and that was the whole goal as far as Chicago Med is concerned. Now, that getting on my second episode, hopefully that journey continues on, but it's for me kind of a slower process in wanting to really tell my particular stories because I know I identify as being an actor first. So in that context, there's an end goal to it. It's just kind of a slow moving process.
Sounds good. I want to ask a general question to all three of you before we start going into audience questions. We've seen just this incredible explosion of representation. I'm thinking especially, I've been watching Sympathizer on Max. It's a really incredible show. Netflix had shows like Beef, Never Have I Ever. You had TV shows like Fresh Off the Boat. You've had all of these Oscar nominations as well as incredible wins for Best Supporting Actor for Yeoh Quan, directorial Oscars, Daniel Quan, Chloe Zhao, and others. So the question is like, have Asian Americans made it? Is this a moment where Asian Americans have come of age?
No.
Does it mean that, I'd like to hear what all of you.
I would actually like to hear what the younger generation thinks, because we've gone through the journey and the trials, and we know what we had
seen it all.
identify with when we were, quite frankly, your guys' age back a long time ago. And I would pose that question to you guys, and if you guys feel like we've made it, you guys feel like, oh, I've seen myself in the media and we're good now. I'm just curious if anyone feels that way. You do, which is great. No.
To an extent.
Yeah.
Not fully, but I think it's better.
That's awesome.
What was it, or what movie or TV series that you actually kind of saw yourself?
I was gonna say The Farewell.
Yeah,
Sure.
How about you?
Farewell.
Not till now, I would say that I've come across a lot of movies where Indian stories are shown, but then they are shown from the point of view of how an American sees an Indian. But what the life is of an Indian middle class person in India, that is totally different. And sad to say, but then a lot of movies have often showed one part of India, which is always, really poor and like the rural part of India. But then the urban crowd is left out completely from this particular setup. And when it comes to, again, like, telling stories, I would agree with what you said. That, the stories of the people should be said by those people and not by someone else, because then they bring their own point of view and not the, like, let's say the life lessons of the people who are living it.
Well, talk to me later. I have tickets for you then. We're showing this feature film. It's called The Queen of My Dreams. It's Canadian Indian. It's a beautiful movie. It's one of the best looking films that I've seen in a while in our festival. Yeah, but it's telling from a more upper middle class Canadian Indian family. It's a really good story. It's set in like the early 90s. A lot of the features we're showing this year are coming of age stories. So Dee Dee takes place in the 70s about a Taiwanese American boy growing up in the 70s. The Queen of My Dreams is, I think it's like 90s, early 2000s. I'm placing it by the score, the music that they use. Coming of age of a South Asian woman. Again, but it's a beautiful film, but it's a universal story. And then our closing night film, Smoking Tigers, is set in the early 2000s, Korean American high school, about to go to college age, where she's feeling pressured by trying to fit into an upper class that she's not part of. It's a really, really good story, and it stars his ex-cast, one of his ex-actors, so it's just by chance that this year, like all the features that we were looking at had this weird kind of theme running through it, and we're like, oh, we're just gonna run with it because, the stories are uniquely different but similar, and you could say that about almost anything. If you took like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and you're like, oh no, that's a Chinese family story, food, it's like all these things that when you look at certain films, you can find a thread to relate it back to you, but it's just like in our festival, it is our stories where you don't have to go, oh, I can imagine this being Chinese, but it's Chinese. So, but yeah, talk to me, I got tickets for you.
Anyone else? Oh, wait,
I feel
you wanna
like
go?
we have a long way to go as far as, at least so East Asian, I feel like
Yeah,
really good representation. For Southeast Asian,
yeah,
Yeah.
not so much. And when it comes to production particularly, really trying to, I know, I commend you for your production company, but I worked for other production companies to try to pitch those stories, and they just take dating in Dubai much more seriously than any other story. Like, how do we kind of break that barrier to really push our stories forward? Not like, I know educationally, but at a larger scale, so that the stories can be at least reached to the masses, if that makes sense. And I don't know if we've come of age as of recently, but I feel like we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But at least we don't only have the Yellow Ranger anymore.
Yes,
There's
Trina
more.
was great.
Yeah, she was.
I think the point you bring up, which is like Asian American, there's a lot of complexity and nuance within that. And saying that we made it, or saying that we've somehow solved the representation game when there's like maybe even 5 years of like overrepresentation. Question really is like how specific are those stories, and like, because this happens all the time. It's like the aggregation of the term Asian American, we get bundled under this one big umbrella, and then you can't actually separate individual cultures, differences, and people start to understand this thing as just one thing when there's like thousands, millions of different
yeah.
And so I think this idea of like, are we in a good spot? The answer to me is no, because there's just so much complexity that we want to bring, right, to storytelling at all different levels, right, into the educational space, at NBC Universal, right, and then like everything in between. I think what Tim does is an amazing asset to these communities, because it does actually give an outlet, and many other festivals that aren't just Asian American, can also show these things. So we have a long way to go.
We've,
But I think you're right.
we've definitely been criticized as being like East Asian focused, but it's not true because there's been films that we would fight for, South Asian films, and they just won't give it to us. And you're like, well, why? I think that's the whole thing that people don't understand is like, in the old days, we could go like this, and we're like, they're like, yeah, no one's gonna show our film, so you can show it. But now, you know, they're looking at mainstream festivals. They see that as their venue. They see that as the golden ticket. They're like, screw that. They're nobodies. We want to try to get this film sold, so we have to go through mainstream markets. And that's the thing that we've been running into where, like, we're like, no, we want that film. And they're like, no thanks, we're gonna pass. And that's the thing that I think people don't understand is like, yeah, we can't get what we want all the time, you know? Most of the time we can't. Like, say last year, I think there was 3 movies at Sundance. We didn't get one of them. This year, we got lucky with Dee, but you know, because the movie's already bought, so they didn't care at that point. But we still had to kiss a lot of butts to get it. And we're like, we just showed Sean Wong's short film last year, you know? And they're like, yeah, so, and we're like, you know, so it's like one of those things that we try a lot to get like, you know, because the term Asian American covers this continent, which is crazy big. And it's like, okay, there's North Asia, South Asia, East, West, Middle, you know, and we try to cover it all, you know, and then even if they don't self-identify as Asian American, you know, but it's technically it is. So we'll consider some things. We're showing a short film that people goes, how is this like Asian American? We're like, well, technically it is, you know, so yeah, I wish that we got everything we wanted and we would be able to show this umbrella of stuff. And then the other thing is sometimes it's just not like from year to year, there's not anything that's good enough or something that we can show. So when you get a chance to see something, just support it. That's all you have to do. And that in alone speaks more than anything, you know? It's like, I'll admit, I had watched the new Kung Fu series. Like, I definitely thought it was gonna be really cringeworthy, because you're just like, oh, this is gonna be bad. It's like some girl playing Kung Fu in San Francisco. But it was the details of the show, not so much of like what the story was about, but you're looking in like the background, there'll be like a Vincent Chin poster. You know, there'll be all these like little subtle things that someone cared. Someone really cared. Somewhere in the production, whether it was the writing, about the stories. And that's what made me keep watching that stupid show, you know? It's like, so bad, but what else can I find in it that like maybe someone else wouldn't notice, but you know, someone put it there. So I did, you know? And that's kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, I don't want to support this thing, but all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I have to, you know? So you know, when you get the chance, support it, you know? That's a statement, but it, you know, it goes not just for us, but say like the Gene Siskel Film Center that has given us this golden opportunity that no other film festival in the country has to be able to every month, every year to be able to do this as part of their regular programming. You know, we're not even like, we don't even call ourselves like a standalone festival. We're just their, you know, their programming. So, so we're like as non-for-profit as you can get. We don't grants, we don't take money, we don't have sponsorship. We just like program for them technically. And then, you know, whatever money we make, we fly directors in, talent in, you know, and then maybe buy a cup of coffee at the end of the day. But yeah, we do it because we like it and we like what it means to our community, you know, that comes out, you know, and to be able to just do something with this opportunity that we have, you know, every year we're like, it's so hard to do, but we're like, oh, we need to do it, you know, we need to get it done, so.
Well, at this point, I'd like to open the questions up to the audience. So any questions from the audience to any of our panelists, I'd appreciate it. And certainly if you're in my class.
Questions are mandatory.
And he's gonna grade it on a curve.
I have a question about the relationship between Asian films, Asian media and then Asian American media here, because when I go to Netflix these days, first I can't help but talk about the Squid Games. Everyone's talking about that. Since then, I feel like when I go to Netflix, right now I don't have a Netflix account anymore because I want to focus on other things. Anyway, so many Korean themed films. Now, increasingly, I teach Chinese here at DePaul, so I'm way more Chinese themed, like coming from China. But I wish there were more Asian American themed films, but comparatively, there are not enough Asian American focused themes. I look at the films. I know, yeah, Farewell is more like across China and also in the Chinese American community here. Yes. I wonder from your perspective, do you see what I see there?
Yeah.
Is there a competition or there's a whole symbiotic or any relationship between Asian films and Asian American films?
I feel like the Asian cinema has been like a massive wave that has come into kind of our medium, which is obviously the largest medium on the planet. And I think that is a good thing. I think that is a more global thing. I think in telling stories, that's always good. I think as far as seeing maybe yourself, maybe from a foreign side of yourself, but seeing does something. I'm much more interested in stories that I can be a part of as an Asian American, that I feel like is the lane where I can do the most good. And in that particular lane, I hope that, people can identify themselves as far as Asian Americans is concerned, but also Asians in that aspect too. So I don't see a competition, but I do see a separation between Asians and Asian Americans. Just to answer the question.
My problem would be coming from presentation as a film festival. If you were to go to, say, like San Francisco International, where they show Asian films and Asian American, they're gonna be showing an Asian film with a budget of like $20 million with a director who has this like long tail of credits. And so when a critic or a reviewer, they wanna review that movie, they're not gonna write about some Asian American film that was shot for like, $175,000 and a director that nobody cares about. They're gonna try to make their name by writing the review of that big Asian film. And that's like why we don't do that. So when we show a film, that film gets all our attention. We're not gonna like take like, a big Asian film and pimp it out, we're not, because then that's taking away from what we're trying to promote, which is the Asian American story. So for us, but I'll go to other film festivals and I'll watch nothing but Asian films. But in particular for us in general, because it blurs the line. There is a distinction between Asian and Asian American. There's like a clear-cut line for me and I don't like that line to be blurred, because then it just adds confusion for people who don't understand that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think what you're seeing on Netflix, if you follow the money, right? Like, it's just like their algorithm, and they have these massive markets, and they can now service all of Korea and all of Japan and all of China with these like big budget films, and the money's coming from those countries to make those, like from Netflix and those countries to support. And so I think that it still kind of tracks to like the business strategy of these streaming platforms. One other thing that I was gonna mention, I think we have one project that we're developing right now with a Japanese director who has come to Chicago and has kind of like fallen in love with the city, and is now co-writing with a Korean American here about a story of like, it's like an immigrant story. And this kind of blends, these two ideas that we have in our head, like Asia and Asian American, but there's like this like immigrant story diasporatic connection that cannot be denied, right? And I think there's a lot of interest in when we like bring those two things together to tell a story that from like the business side attracts different kinds of funding, B from a storytelling side actually brings some authenticity to like maybe what it might be like for like a very like early immigrant in the US kind of living with some and pairing that with somebody who's been here for a generation or two to co-create a story. I think that kind of space is really interesting, but like I think right now we do see it as like it's either an Asian story or an Asian American story. Although I think expat's a good example of like what they're
Yeah.
doing in that.
I think there's certain stories that can be blended, but there is a bit of a separation. But I will say that though, that no matter whether it's Asian or Asian American, it all helps in a very maybe universal or global way. Because when the industry follows the money and says, oh my gosh, Squid Game's crushed it. Asian faces can sell globally. That's a good thing. And even if we're trying to tell our stories or you guys are trying to tell your stories, they're more open to the opportunity because we've hit certain markers as far as money is concerned, right? You can talk about all kinds of things that we've done, especially in the television world, especially the ones that are coming from foreign lands, but to any person as far as the industry and the business side of things, you can always say, no, these shows have done well with all Asian cast, right? They've killed the nominations and the awards, or they've made billions of clicks or numbers or however they antiquate all of that stuff. And you can identify and say, no, you can't say that Asians can't sell anything. You can't say that. So I think that's why it's kind of changed the pendulum and really kind of hopefully flipped it into the right direction.
Hi, my name is Andrew. With the help of Professor Yukota, I've been watching a lot of Spencer Nakasako's movies, Refugee, aka Don Bonus.
We showed all those films.
And I really appreciate them because I grew up in the Southwest. And they remind me a lot of like these deviant Asian American faces that I knew. And I really like that. That's going against the grain of, this like liberal upper middle class college figure that I feel gets pushed too much.
Or the model minority.
Yeah, something along those lines. So with that in mind, I guess my question for the three of you is, are there any sort of uncomfortable or against the grain stories that you have not seen that you wish to see? And I guess I phrase it like that because I wanted to ask you all three to like imagine something that hasn't been said yet. But like a story that's like uncomfortable. Maybe it's like too conservative or it's like too radical or I don't know.
I probably watch between the short films, the documentaries, and the features that I have to watch yearly for our festival. I've seen it all. Without joking, I've seen some stuff where you're like, huh? And then you're like, oh, interesting. Would we screen it? Probably not. But yeah, there's definitely been stuff that we were just like, oh, I really didn't know like stuff like this. Yeah, and it's kind of weird because again, like I have to watch everything, but we may not ever show it, but it's still like, from student shorts to like, well-produced documentaries, but you're just like, I think I've seen it all. But, that's a great question, but it's that whole thing was, we always wanted to show characters that are outside the box in our festival. Everyone thinks they have an idea of what an Asian American is. And so we're always looking for a story or history that nobody knows about or hasn't been told before. We're showing a documentary this year about a Japanese American world-class rock climber, 13-year-old girl. It's like one of those things you're like, huh? You're like, oh no, she's like this badass climber, who's famous, but it's just like you wouldn't think of, a 13-year-old girl as climbing out 514, in South Africa. So we're always kind of like looking for those kind of like outside the box type stories, especially like in sports or adventure sports, where you don't actually see a lot of like Asian American faces there. So my experience, yeah, I've probably seen like, yeah, stuff that I probably should never talk about, but
Think, yes. In the context of the question, I believe what you're asking is like, do you want to imagine or create stories that the public can see that aren't so stereotypical? I think,
Yeah,
right?
and like,
Because
what would it look like for you? Like, what's the one that you,
what was the one that looks like for me? Gosh,
like unlimited funding, total creativity?
I mean, I guess off the top, I don't know. I would love to demystify the stereotypes, that's for sure. I would love to demystify this model minority myth, that's for sure. I would love to see the struggle of the Asian American and not just like the bling of the Asian American, the crazy rich Asian American. I would love to see, because the majority of us like struggle, right? We have the largest discrepancy between the rich and the poor amongst our whole community. I would love to see the stories of us grassrooting it from the ground up, right? Really kind of being a part of that inner turmoil of trying to succeed, not just being successful. And I think those are the stories that I feel hopefully the growing public can identify with. Because it's interesting to watch Asians, and I'm generalizing in a very commercial way, right? As the minority, as the successful one and all this other stuff. And the media has kind of expanded on that, where it's created this particular stereotype that doesn't necessarily help us or identify us with us or see us, especially with other cultures outside of Asian America or Asian, to identify with us, right? We identify now with Caucasians that are successful. And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
Because we unfortunately go through the same circumstances of the cultures. It's just in a different way because the media has changed it. So yeah, I would like to show the other side of it, the complete other side. So hopefully other people can identify with that and kind of universalize that aspect so we can all understand each other in a much more meaningful way.
yeah, the trend for us in the last couple of years, especially with student filmmakers, were a lot of things about mental health. Yeah, and suicide has been like, yeah, there's definitely been an upward trend in that in the recent years. Like post-COVID, we've been seeing a lot of those types of stories. Which, you know, in the past we would get like a lot of stuff about like addiction and gambling, like those types of stories. But this, yeah, definitely in the Asian American, not like, you know, in Asia, suicide is huge, but like in Asian America, you didn't really think that it was that kind of prevalent. But we've definitely been seeing a lot of those in the student shorts coming the last few years. I think we're showing 2 of them this year. One from, I think, a Northwestern student too.
I saw your hand.
Yes, hi, Valerie Johnson. I understand what you all mean by this sort of stereotypical Asian. I grew up in the 60s, 70s, and you know, it's like all the Asian representation was of either a restaurant or a cleaners, a dry cleaners, right? And so from that aspect, you know, we've come a long way, for sure. So I do understand the whole problematic nature of, you know, sort of erasing culture. But at the same time, you know, I want to problematize this a bit and ask whether, you know, there is an authentic Asian story, given the fact that so much of Asian history in America has been about assimilation. I mean, whether you're talking about, you know, adoptions where you got the white parent and, you know, or just, I mean, Asians are the most assimilated group.
But technically by law, we had to.
Right.
You know, with the Exclusion Acts and things like that, being not, women not being able to own property, men not being able to marry white. You know, we had to fight through these struggles to find a way to adapt, you know?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, say, like, when I think about like the Japanese Americans coming out of the internment camps, and the lives that they had to go through, I actually bowl on Nisei bowling leagues. So it's been in existence in Chicago since like 1947. So after the war had ended, and then most of the Japanese Americans couldn't go back to where they lived. So a lot of them moved to Chicago and worked in factories on the south side. And they started this bowling league just for fun, to be able to congregate and to be together. And in meeting the people that I bowl with, and a lot of them now have sway, but most of them, were born or lived in these camps, and like it took a while to be able to talk to them about these stories and experiences, but then it's realizing that because of having to adapt, having to fit in, then having to prove themselves being American after the war, and then you notice that most of their children, married Caucasian afterwards, just to be able to, in essence, walk around a parade and pretend like, oh, look, we're just like you now. But that, trying to find ways, and it's not a knock against them, it's just that you do what you have to think you have to do to be able to fit in.
And the reason why I asked that question is because I used to have this aversion to Black respectability politics. I'm like, oh, wow, they're just, trying to fit in, but that is our story, right?
Yeah.
That is so much a part of our story, just trying to fit in.
Yeah, I think, the whole thing about being authentic is just be who you are. Don't try to be what you think other people want you to be. Just be who you are and tell your story, when given the chance,
I think the media a lot of the times though kind of tokenizes this assimilation.
Yeah.
I think I was on a series that did the same thing for 8 seasons. I think if you changed my character's name to Dr. Ethan Hernandez or Dr. Ethan Smith or Dr. Ethan, whatever you want to say, and not change the word of dialogue, you could have the same exact character. And I think there is a universal problem with that, because that is a sense of assimilation in a tokenized way where it's just this person. And that's really it. That happens to have an Asian face, but yet we don't really talk about it. When the whole Asian uproar was actually happening, we still don't talk about it. He's just the doctor guy that happens to be Asian. And I think that the medium is so strong that we can uplift, we can educate, right? We don't necessarily have to like shovel in kind of our cultural diaspora, like and liberal rhetoric down anyone's throats. But I think there's a better way to tell story with a particular sensibility when we're dealing with culture. And I just think that the mainstream media doesn't necessarily want to identify with that just yet. And I think that artists like such as yourselves can do that because the pendulum is changing. There is much more things coming to Asia, right? There's much more awareness. There's much more commercialization as far as Asian faces are concerned, and much more people following the money. So the pendulum has definitely shifted over to the opportunities that all of us have, and you guys especially being the younger generation, that can fulfill these particular stories.
Jason, I don't know if you had any response to that question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think it comes down to like the intent of a project. And maybe one thing that, like, one of the viewpoints I have is that if somebody wants to tell the story and history and the impact of assimilation on them, they should be allowed to do that. If somebody doesn't want to tell that story, they should also be allowed to do that. And there should be the ecosystem and the support and the funding for both of those two artists to go off and do what they want to do. If somebody wants to tell the assimilation story, but invert it in a way that is like incredibly creative, like I think of what's the guy who does like Us and Nope and yeah, like the way he uses comedy as a social commentary, like that, I think is a really incredible way to kind of like reframe things, but talk about like very serious issues. And the way that I think about this is that we want a media landscape and ecosystem that can allow voices to explore all those things, including maybe the thing that's most closely like aligned to like their actual experience as an Asian American growing up in a place where they are forced constantly and reminded to assimilate. I think every artist is going to have a different way to express that, and want to create a system where each of those approaches can be supported.
Yeah, it's because like everyone family has a story. You know, no matter like, you might not think so, but you know, when you start like learning your history, your family history, going back, and then you know, everyone, other people may not want to know it, but it's, you know, everyone does have a story. And it's just a question of, do you want to tell it? How do you want to tell it? Do you want to tell it in a graphic novel? Do you just want to write it? Or do you just want to live it? You know, but, you know, embrace that history that you have and your family story.
Because I was just thinking that, you know, like Brian was saying earlier about, you know, that's transcending Asianness, right? And I think for some people, that is a goal.
Sure,
You know?
yeah, I think, it's interesting as far as our medium is concerned, because you can get superstars that transcend their race, right? And then they can be anything, which is good. I think it helps storytellers be able to tell their stories, because when you see figures such as like a Denzel Washington, right? He's just an amazing actor. My favorite, like bar none. That transcends himself. And then when Denzel talks about race, right? Everyone's listening. Everyone's leaning in, right? And they don't doubt him for a second. And he implements that into his pictures, into his movies. And the person writing them isn't necessarily Black, African American. They're most times Caucasian person, but they're writing for Denzel, and then Denzel will implement certain things. And I think that's always so helpful. That when you transcend your race, you can always bring that back, because that's innately you in that context, and no one's gonna deny it, because you're Denzel Washington, right? You're not just the Black guy, you're Denzel Washington. So he's been able to do that, and a lot of other actors have. I have not seen an Asian actor. There is not one Asian American actor that can do that.
The Rock.
I don't know if The Rock identifies with, I guess, yeah, you're right. I guess The Rock does in that sense for
But
sure.
what about the killing, what is it,
Killing Sandra Oh?
Yeah.
Sandra's amazing. Sandra's like,
She's Canadian. She's not.
Korean, but you know, he's definitely East Asian, and she's like the GOAT to me.
She was at our
question.
film festival when she was a kid. I think she wasn't even 20, and she had to sleep on somebody's couch. And now we look back and we're like, oh my God, Sandra Oh slept on your couch for 2 days. You know, it was back when she did Nina Shung's film, Double Happiness. So she was, yeah, I mean, she was little Sandra Oh. She's not like big Sandra Oh. But you know, that's how long our festival's been around. But yeah, we have these histories with these people and these actors. And it's one of those things like, we think sometimes, like, is there gonna be a time when we don't have to do our festival anymore? You know, is it to the point where Asian American films become accepted? You know, I mean, that's,
Well, let me ask.
I don't know if that's our end goal.
Then Tim, because just listening to your conversations, how Asian filmmakers now are looking to the Cannes and looking to the Tribecas and looking to all of these like monster ones wanting to sell their particular films. Are those film festivals more open now to Asian content?
Yes.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that's a good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing for the filmmakers, don't get me wrong, it's a bad thing for us when we don't get the films that everyone wants to see, you know?
Sure.
You can take like last year, the film Shortcomings, you know, which is based off a graphic novel that everyone loves. And it's in particular, it takes place in an Asian American film festival. I'm like, oh, this is perfect, this is gonna be great. It was directed by Randall Park, everyone knows Randall Park. You know, and it was like,
American Studies major.
yeah, and guess what? We didn't get the film, and I'm like writing to, I forgot who bought it, but I'm writing going, no, we're an Asian American festival. This is what this film is based about. And they're like, yeah, sorry, we're just gonna do theatrical in the fall. And then the thing was, is that nobody knew about the film. it played a week in Chicago and then died because like nobody got to see it at a festival and talk about it and get it, get anyone interested in it. So it played 1 week and then went to streaming, so they kind of missed like that whole word of mouth, that vibey thing of getting people excited about it. And then it just went,
I want to take a second, we're starting to run down our time, but I know there must be a lot of questions for the audience. So what I'd like to do right now is ask maybe several of you, if you have any questions, let's just ask all of the questions and
All at once.
we'll allow the presenters or the panelists an opportunity to respond to whichever ones they'd like to respond to. Yeah.
So if you each share in your career, where would you hope to see Asian Americans in the media industry? So you wrap up, I know when I was younger, you saw 0, and now we're at this much better point, but it's still very much a model minority, crazy rich Asians. That's what people want to see. I know I would want to be able to see regular stories from my life be told to the mass population. So what would each of you hope?
Duffy?
Sort of going off of that and inspired by you mentioning Sandra Oh and Double Happiness, to get larger amounts of Asian American representation, are you comfortable with like sacrifices being made in the sense of, because Sandra's Korean and her character in that movie is Chinese, or someone who is Japanese playing someone who's Korean or Vietnamese or Filipino or something? Is that something that's like a sacrifice that's willing to make, or are we going to be pressing for authenticity both in casting and behind the camera?
I saw some other hands. Yeah.
I'm just struck by this whole dynamic of telling your own story, and by doing that, landing in a universal space, And I was wondering, if the goal is really to transcend, in this case, Asianness, or is it an important aspect in developing that universal story? So it's like in order to have an authentic, universal story, you need to be your authentic self, right? And so.
And any other questions? Any other questions? I know there's a lot. Yeah.
So just curious, in the industry, do you see changes happening behind the scenes where like a variety of Asians are employed to help write scripts,
Yes.
produce and all of that? And if so, how can we get to a place like, for instance, Kim's Convenience, racial aside, with problems with that one, but how can we get to a space where we can kind of tell stories like that to the mass media, to kind of show that like the Korean American experience, for instance?
Pick and choose.
That's an easy one. People in power. You have to get the people in power. That's where it's been shifting, where you're getting people, executive producers, writers who.
How do you get them prepared? How do you get them prepared?
Well, it's like, everyone picks their pet projects, and that's like, once they get into that system where they start to be able to make decisions. And I think that's where the shift changes. It's not just about hiring the right directors, but it's getting those people who greenlight things to say yes. And that's what matters. And that's where the money is.
Brian and then Jason.
I'm gonna answer a few questions. I don't necessarily feel that the end goal is to transcend your Asianness. I think your Asianness is innately you. So it's really about getting to a particular level where people see you and for who you are. And to be able to play in that world that you can start educating them, right? And I think if there was a goal for that, then yeah, but that's not the end all be all. I think we can all tell our stories in the way that we want to tell our stories. It's just harder to do, right? It's just, they don't identify with these like top of movie stars or television stars in that sense. So when I say transcend, it's like so that people can get the money behind you as an artist, and then that artist can tell the stories that they want to tell. And then everyone will look at it like, oh my gosh, that's genius. Yeah. That's so incredibly genius. As far as authenticity I feel is very, very slippery slope double standard. And I'm very passionate about this, and some of you may disagree, and that's okay. But from my perspective as an artist, the best actor should win. If the best actor can play that particular part, they should get it. If you're dealing with a historical figure, no question the authenticity needs to be there. It has to be there because it's history, I think. Just as far as humanity, you should do that. I think what we do is play pretend. I think we make stuff up out of like figments of our imagination, right? And if they want to cast this particular person that's really good for this role, say like a Sandra Oh, she's doing the Sympathizer right now, she's playing a Japanese person. She's fantastic because she's Sandra Oh. No one balks at my co-star Nicole Kidman for playing, she's Australian, right? Daniel Day-Lewis is a Brit, plays the most American that you guys all know because we're in the land of Lincoln, and wins an Academy Award. And he's praised as the greatest actor of his generation. But yet I feel like as far as the community, and I'll get to your question very soon, we somehow give ourselves that double standard, right? That it has to be so authentic or else you're not identifying with me. But yet as a community, we're all considered Asian Americans. But yet we live in this like monolith, right? We're not like this monolith by any means, because we're not. And we come from different aspects, identities and cultures and countries and all of these different stories, yet we're all trying to identify to this one group of Asian or Asian American. And I think that's hard. It's extremely hard. But I think if we can support one another, right? Whether it's supporting an Indian in middle class kind of story, or a South Asian particular story, I think if we can all build upon that, it would only help us instead of trying to knock it down. Like, oh, I can't identify with that Asian American because that's just not my story. Or, you know what, he's really Chinese. He shouldn't be playing that crazy character, right? Because if we really boil down to what are we doing? We're just doing it to ourselves. This is all pretend. This is all media. These are stories that we want to identify with to entertain, but then also to hopefully beat the spinach with. And in the grand scheme of things, I feel like we should all be involved in wanting to tell our stories, but also supporting one another for doing that, no matter how we get to that end point. And I think to be able to cross-culturalize or play different characters that you don't necessarily identify with is all a very good thing. I really do, because it only kind of helps to broaden, I feel, the community in a much greater way. And I feel like over the course of my career, it's this kind of butting of heads with like, what are we doing? What are we doing to ourselves? And I think if we band together as a particular community, it would be much more fruitful for everyone.
I think you wanted to respond to your question as well?
I don't, did I or didn't
Well,
I?
I feel like you did, you got very
I feel
deep.
like it's
so thank you
super
for-
deep, sorry, I was very passionate. And it's a very nice night.
Yeah, there's so much movement happening. I don't.
Sorry, yeah, lots.
Stand up.
Yeah.
So there was a question that you wrote down, I think, as we're preparing, like, what can we do? Like, what can people do to help?
Yeah.
I think of valuing, so first of all, I kind of have a problem with the idea of like, I need to see myself, like me personally, like, there's also a responsibility in the audiences to connect with stories and to understand like what the through line of humanity is, because that opens you up to people telling classic and universal stories, but with different characters and different identities. But that's on us to also find ways to connect with that stuff. So like, don't look for, like, it has to be the exact person my age, this race, this gender, I think for audiences to find themselves in a diverse set of stories is really important. Specific to like the thing that I deal with and think about a lot is like the funding and kind of like the financial backing behind these things. And this is a broader problem that I think we're moving towards like a better batting average on, but like when it comes to I'll just use it like the very broad term Asian American and and valuing media and representation and artistic careers, like we're like the bottom rung of like, you know, everybody. And I think like when you look at, so when you look at like foundation and philanthropy and the dollars that are coming from Asian American people who have been highly successful in business and the corporate world, very small amounts of that are going towards media representation, funding the arts. There's a lot of pressure that families who, I totally understand this, are like first generation, second generation immigrants, the like parents put a lot of, you know, guardrails against like what they're doing professionally. And what we're trying to do is show people that it's not just like, I think your question was like, what do you want to see? It's not just what you see on the screen, it's like all these other roles, the executive producers, the producers who are greenlighting, like all these roles are critically important. And like, there is like anything you study in school, there is a job in film or in like media that requires that skill set, right? Like even if you're studying science, like there's a job in film and media that like requires that skill set and that type of brain. And so there's so many ways to contribute and to find a professional career that assists this larger thing that we're talking about, which is representation in media. And the thing that we're trying to do is to cultivate like workforce development pathways into those roles that might not be like, you might not want to do what Brian does, right? And you might not want to do what Tim does or what I do. There's so many roles that the more people that can come into this industry and can work their way into positions where they're making decisions, that's one side of it. I don't really know how to solve like the audience question, because like I think at the highest level of commercial success it's all about numbers and audiences and dollars, right? So like for NBC Universal to put an all Asian cast on and then run that for like 15 years, it's not like that comes down to who's watching, who's purchasing that stuff, and like what the actual dollars are. So that I don't really have a solution for, but I do think supporting local media, supporting Asian American storytellers and stories, being active in those kinds of communities helps, and like spreading that message out is the small thing that we can do. But there's like some serious and large problems that we're like facing as within this industry that are not just tied to this industry. They're like rooted in like inequity, like much more deeply. So I think we're like on a good path. We need to like really press in when those opportunities present themselves, and then when they go away, we need to stay committed. That's what I think.
Yeah, and then when you're watching something, just try to pay attention to the story. Sometimes it's the details that will get you. Justin Lin, back to Justin, we could do a whole thing on Justin Lin. On Warriors, the TV show that he's executive producing, there's so much history in that show. It's crazy if you actually break it down, what stuff they're feeding you, it's great. You know, they tell these stories that you would not believe in the guise of like, you know, triads and kung fu and like stuff, but there's a lot of real history in that film, in that show too, if you take out all the fighting. But yeah, it's like little things like that when, you know, so obviously someone who created the show cared. They cared about getting the details right, maybe giving some, you know, eye candy, but also real historical facts to it too. And again, it's like one of those things that I'm watching and going, oh my God, it's true. These stories are true. I know these stories. And you're like, oh, I'm watching this crazy Kung Fu series, but you know, it's cool. So yeah, so when it doesn't necessarily mean to be authentic by the actors or whatever, but pay attention to the details of the stories and what it's about. You know, that's where it all matters.
Now, we have just a few more minutes. I want to open it back up to questions from the audience. Any additional last questions? We'll take them again in sort of a pack and allow folks to ask them.
Yeah, there's one question from Zoom. Jordan asks, do we need another fresh off the boat, or should we focus energies on inclusive cast?
Okay. Any additional questions? Yes.
Now you spoke about the inequities in the entertainment business industry. And so I'm curious to see what that what you would think that route would look like to get to those places where you can greenlight a film, right? So, from, you know, pitch work to like, as an artist, like what are those paths that you can see to kind of get to that level where you can make those decisions and have that impact?
One final question, anyone?
I mean, I have more of a, I want to talk specifically to Jason, but I'm actually a professor in game design, so thinking about media, I think about representation, and I actually do more like social impact games, so thinking kind of more about what you're doing in a more educational sense, rather than
You want to talk to?
entertainment.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess it's more of a, also this question being, you know, in Chicago, in Illinois with like the Teach Act.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, what, I mean, I've been researching, just looking at where media in general is telling more of these stories. Things, there's of course lots on incarceration, and I think, and other, stories, but just kind of thinking about like where, you know, kind of where is, as creators, like what story, how do we get these stories? Where is the place for these stories, you know, when we know that we're also trying to advocate for it in the learning spaces, or maybe whether they're more formal or informal. So that was a quite, I don't know how to phrase it, but yeah, but that it's great that there's these like mandates and shifts towards more representation. I guess to say like we're trying to move towards more representation in curriculum and learning, but like, is it really happening, or how can we, as younger people and creators, move that?
And so let's just go down the line, and then if you could just add any final comments you'd like to make at the end of your statements.
Okay. All right,
No pressure.
yeah, so I think, yeah, I think like the kind of pathways that we're talking about, like we're trying to do them, like, you know, creating these like incubator programs, making, like building our networks into the Sundances and the Tribecas of the world to make sure that like the artists that we know that have like come up, you know, doing work here that are connected to us, that we can then connect them into these like larger industry pathways that create a better chance for success, like on a bigger stage. Yeah, and I think there's a lot to like kind of tinkering's another word, like thinking through like systems of inequity, like a value of ours when people come to work with Spectrum is root cause analysis. And what that means is just like asking the question that you have to ask after the question, like after the final question, because there's always like one more kind of like level of rootedness around inequity that we're like trying to think about and solve. And it's gonna be a lifetime, you know, of work. And I think just real quick on your question, the Teach Act in particular is something that we're super focused on, just given the, you know, there's a portfolio of our projects are about Japanese American incarceration and are intended to teach within that. And so we're actually trying to build and like fund and build the structure with like UIUC, with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and with the projects that we create to talk to teachers about like what other topics are missing that you need like some engaging way to teach about, and include them in the include the educators and the students in the process of helping us like define that, and then going off and finding the funding and pushing it down that model to build tools that are relevant to the history that are, you know, missing in these curriculums, and give like an engaging platform for students to learn. And yeah, like I guess last comment, thanks for coming and for, you know, talking with us. Hopefully stick around after this, and one chat with this has been one conversation.
I think Jason answered it well. I think it really depends on the medium that you guys are searching for. I think now, especially in days kind of 2024, there are certain pathways if you're just starting out. There's diversity programs all across from each kind of, whether it's a writing program, a directing program, even acting. So I think there's a lot more opportunity for growth. There's also organizations that have done really well at CAPE. I don't know if you guys all know CAPE. They have definitely certain programs and pathways if you're first starting out, but to what Jason was saying, it's trying to get your foot in the door, these particular worlds and these particular elements, to really kind of tell your story in the way that you want to tell it, but be in positions to greenlight other stories, right, that you identify with. Maybe not specifically that we talked about, but a very universal kind of humanistic approach to things. And it's innately you, right, being an Asian or an Asian American, that can identify those stories, but then also all the other stories that you feel that appeal to. I'll let you guys talk more. But to answer the question online, as far as do we need another freshman to vote? I guess I'm trying to identify where that question is coming from. And my answer to sure is because I would love to just to see a more volume of content, but I would also love to see something not so on the money as fresh out the boat, but something different from a different perspective, like we've all talked about here. But what Fresh Off the Boat did have was some kind of universal qualities, and I think that's what the mass audience is kind of attracted to, and I feel like that's what most studios and networks are attracted to when you're dealing with those types of shows. But I would love to see all different kinds of shows from different perspectives and different spectrums of our kind of Asian American. It doesn't necessarily have to be the only diaspora of it, right? There's such a multiculturalness, even amongst Asians, right? That we can kind of communicate with and we can kind of deal with as far as our connective tissue is concerned, and even outside of Asia, right? All the cultures that we have to deal with just living in our world. I think that's a beautiful thing. And to be able to kind of speak on those stories is what we want to do more and more of.
We do have the Fresh Off the, it's Aquafina Nora from Queens. That show is so good. And it explores all the Asian stories. I mean, outside of like drug use and like weirdness, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, to me, like, it's like the progression of like Fresh Off the Boat. It's taking that basic idea, but just like going wild with it. And that show is like, if you've never seen it, it's good. Yeah, and they touch a lot of weird subjects. So check it out if you can. And again, like this to me, like I'm an auto mechanic, so none of this means anything to me. You know, I do this for fun. You know, we literally run a film festival for fun, and because we can. And it's having these opportunities and knowing what we like to do, and you know what a great opportunity it is for our community. So it just proves that, like, if you have a passion or you like something, go for it. Just run with it. You know, what's the worst someone's gonna say is like, no, sorry. You know, and who cares? You know, so if you like something, just go for it. You want to tell a story? Go for it. If you watch a cringeworthy series, you know, embrace it. You know, maybe you'll find something cool about it. You know, and again, I'm not an actor. I'm not a production. I'm not into anything except just like, oh, I can pick movies for a theater show. Why not? So again, thanks for coming, and
Tickets.
I have tickets.
Definitely thank you everybody for coming here. Your questions were really helpful in terms of drawing out a lot of responses from our panelists. Again, just big round of applause for them.
I think we have probably should organize this kind of panel discussion every 10 years to see. Keep asking, has the Asian American media come of age yet or not? So we hope we can shortly invite you guys back here and share with our community. But here, I also want to emphasize this event is sponsored by Global Asian Studies Program, critical ethnic studies program, which right now Professor Jataka is teaching the course for, and we have a lot from the program, and also the Office of Inclusive Diversity and Equity. And also thank you all for being here. I want to stress that, we have this event every spring. We really focus on, we want to bring the entire community from DePaul and outside DePaul. We talk about issues that's very important for our Asian American communities. I welcome you to come back, keep coming back every spring to join us. We're also discussing other classes as well, but we have this focal like an event, okay? Also want to address here, we have our Vice Provost of DEI who's here, Professor Valerie Johnson. Thank you for being here, spending more time with us, and hope everyone keep coming back and enjoy night. Also, I was informed that they have to take away the food, in 15 minutes. Please finish the food before they come away. Okay. All right. Thank you for your time here.
But you go back and celebrate the death of a family member. But yeah, it's a great film, and it's something that, you might be able to get something out of it.
And